Morning, everyone, and thanks, Martin. Fionnuala, maybe you could start by talking to us about the two roles you have in Google. So they're quite distinct roles, and how you manage and juggle those.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Lovely to be here. In my day job, I manage a large part of the ads business for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So that's, obviously our core business for Google. And so that is working with small and medium-sized businesses all over Europe, Middle East, and Africa, really just to get them, to some extent set up online, but also, trying to help them improve their presence online and really achieve their business goals online. And that's across a variety of different sectors, and that's all from here in Dublin. So it's an international team based out of Dublin. So that team, in and of itself, will probably hit 1,000 people next year.
Wow.
And it's a business I've grown together with Shane in the audience today. Over the past 7 years, I think we started with 200 people. So it's been a phenomenal growth story. And it continues to be a growth story, which I think is important. And then 3 years ago, I took on the head of Google Ireland role, which is a very different role. It really is taking responsibility for all of Google's employees in Ireland, our presence in Ireland, policy, working with government, working with the community. Really, I suppose, thinking about how Google in Ireland stays relevant for Google Inc. So one of the things going on over in the West Coast, how is Dublin positioned to make sure that we're getting the right level of investment? Then how do we make sure that we are good for the Googlers who work in Ireland? So that's a lot about culture and making sure that we look at things like well-being and that it is, that it stacks up with the rest of the Google sites globally. It's a great place to work. And then lastly, that we're good for Ireland, right? So the Dublin leadership team, we are a team of people who represent all of the functions in the Dublin site, and there's a few things that make the Dublin site stand out. It's one of the largest sites globally for Google, but I think the two things that make it stand out is it's one of the most culturally diverse sites. We have 70 nationalities, 75 languages spoken, but we also have a huge diversity of functions. In addition to sales, we have engineering, we have legal, we have people operations, we have cloud, we have trust and safety. So we have a wide variety of functions. We have a big presence here. So we want to make sure that, the fact that Google is here obviously benefits Google as a company. We want to make sure it also benefits Ireland to, when we think about the community as well, our local community, when we think about outreach and things like that. So that role is really, falls into those three areas, being, relevant for Google over on the West Coast, being a good place to work for our Googlers, and then thinking about how we're good for Ireland.
So it's fair to say you've a lot going on, man.
Yes.
And in terms of Google and Alphabet, I mean, a lot of people may understand or may not quite get fully grasp the structure within the organisation. So you have Google, which is the main ads search business, which is the income driver, as I understand it, for the rest of the businesses. But then within Google itself, you now have cloud services and other non-ad related businesses. And then in the wider context, Alphabet, which is where you have driverless cars and Nest.
Yeah.
And all. So how does that all... In Ireland, is there any elements of Alphabet here, or is it just all Google?
It's mostly Google. Yeah, it's mostly Google. If I think about our presence here, we're 70% a sales site, and that over the years has been mostly advertising. But we have sales teams looking after publishers, app developers, and then more recently, over the past few years, our cloud sales teams have been increasing in size. And we do have an engineering function. That's our site reliability function. We have data centers and network operations centres as well. So we have about 600 engineers as well, and it's one of the largest site reliability engineering sites around the world. And that engineering function is about kind of keeping Google's corporate infrastructure up and running, and some of its consumer-facing infrastructure as well. So literally this Gmail and calendar work when you go to use them, but equally that our corporate infrastructure works, and that's kind of the backbone of our cloud services as well. So it is mostly that. It's mostly our footprint is mostly focused on Google, but I think we we're always looking for opportunities, you know, when we think about the other bets as well, just to think about how Ireland can be, and Dublin can be relevant.
So what you're doing is you're making all the money over here to send it to California so they can figure out how to...
Yeah, well, there's a very real aspect of that is, you know, the ads business is where we make the money, and then we invest hugely in big bets and in moonshots, you know, so I think some of the bigger bets are the cloud business and YouTube and hardware, and then some of the moonshots are some of those things that are a bit further out, like driverless cars or like, you know, Loon, all of those other kind of moonshot ideas where there's a lot of incubation needed, and that I suppose they're aimed at solving some of the world's big problems, or using technology to solve some of the world's big problems. And I think Astra Teller was on Bloomberg this week talking about the fact that a lot of that is trying stuff and it fails. Yeah. So yeah, you do need to invest a lot.
So if you, with all that's going on in Alphabet at the moment, if you had to say, I'd like to get involved in one project, what might that be?
I think there's a lot of we can do from a sustainability point of view, and you know, I think we've been carbon neutral since 2007 as a company. But I think, you know, if you think about the broad mission of Google to organise the world's information, you know, make it universally accessible and useful, but over the years, you know, underpinning that is how you use technology to solve some of the world's biggest problems. And I think this is one of the world's biggest problems, if not the biggest problem. So I think that's, you know, that's an area that increasingly our graduates coming in, you know, so every year we take on graduates, and with each wave of graduates, you kind of get a sense of what's on their minds, and sustainability is definitely something that's on their minds, and something they're expecting us to do something about as a company. So I think we're taking the power of what we can do from a technology point of view and trying to point it at some of those problems is probably some of the most exciting things we could do as a company.
And I've heard you described as a technology optimist.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I think we hear a lot about technology platforms, and they are platforms, and you know, they can be polarizing, you know, these days, and I think we see a lot of that. But I suppose what you see internally though is how technology can help with, say, the consumerization of health, or how it can break down barriers in terms of access to information, and really how it can be used for good. And I suppose technology is a platform like any other platform. It enables you to do things, and you can do good things with it, you can do bad things with it. I think, you know, when you see the power of something like machine learning, you know, can help with early diagnosis of cancer and things like that. I think that's one of the most exciting areas. And I know we talk about privacy, and obviously we build privacy into our products from the get-go, from design. You can't design a product in Google without having a privacy design built into it, in terms of transparency to users and control and ability to delete their data and bring it with them and all of that sort of stuff. But there's also, you know, a really nice way that you can use some of that data in aggregate around things like early diagnosis of diseases. So, you know, that's I think that makes me optimistic, right? And I think if I look into the future, what technology would I be really interested and excited about would be the consumerization of health, and how you know, collecting that data in aggregate can help individuals who maybe don't have access to healthcare, you know, maybe spot things earlier and think about how powerful that could be in the developing world. Yeah, I think that's one example of it.
And I was reading recently a colleague of yours, Ray Kurzweil, who, for people who don't know, is probably the world's leading futurist and director of engineering in Google, and he's been saying that there's a seminal moment approaching in the whole world of technology, that, you know, machines will be able to outthink humans. And he's actually put a date on it of 2029, which is quite staggering in the sense that he can put a date on it and it's that close. What do you see as the potential concerns with, you know, AI and nanotech and you know, even computer brain interface, all those sort of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really early days. I mean, if you listen to Sundar Pichai, who's our CEO, he's actually very optimistic about machine learning and AI because of the human element in it, right? I mean, because it is about, you know, humans working with machines to solve problems that we need to solve. So he's very, you know, he believes that we'll get to the right outcomes because of the human part in that equation. And so I think it's important to remember that we are very early on. And that if you look at a lot of the machine learning and how AI is being used at the moment, It's very specific use cases, it's a lot of pattern recognition, etc. And so I still think we're, a little bit, further away from some of these more kind of futuristic kind of statements. But I think, how we look at it in fact, how we look at it in Google Ireland is, probably looking at every business and understanding how machine learning can help that business, because we are sales and operations focused, but increasingly we talk about technical operations and how we build machine learning into a lot of the things that we're doing to speed up processes or to recognize patterns faster. And I suppose, what does that allow you to do? Well, that allows you to redeploy your workforce, but to redeploy your workforce, you have to have an agile workforce, right? And you have to have a way of training them. That doesn't mean you pull them into training, for 3 hours or 5 hours or an entire day or 3 days. So I think, the way to think about it is, to be opportunistic about how machine learning can help make you more efficient in whatever business you're in, but then to think about, if that's the case, and if we were able to kind of, scrape away a lot of the low value work that we're doing, that your workforce is potentially doing, well, then how do you redeploy them? And I think that gets you thinking about, skills building and agility and the profile of people you're hiring, that you're not necessarily hiring for one specific skill, but you're hiring for people who can learn, who can develop, who can show that agility. And I think we see that across the board. That's definitely something that we're looking for, not just at the leadership level, but lower down as well.
Okay. Can I take it back to you? You mentioned culture a while ago, and the importance of culture. So as somebody who's leading an organisation of 8,000 people in Ireland, how important is culture to you? How do you create and foster it in Google?
Yeah, culture is such an important thing, and particularly as we have increased the size of the company over the past few years, we've been really aware of how you maintain a culture while continuing to hire thousands and thousands of people every year. And so, how do all of these new people coming in know what it means to be googly, or know what Google culture means? Like, what does it actually mean? It is something you need to work at, though. And one of my colleagues in Dublin has a great phrase, and he often says that culture is like French bread, you need to bake it every day. And I suppose the point there is that we can't just expect any workplace, but certainly the way we think about it, we can't just expect the culture to be there. You have to nurture it, you have to feed it, you have to see how it's evolving, you have to be listening for what's on people's minds, you have to be talking openly as leaders as to what the culture actually means on a day-to-day basis, and talk about a huge part of what we talk about is diversity, inclusion, respect, but what do they actually mean on a day-to-day basis? And as soon as our new Googlers come through the door, we start that conversation with them, and really I suppose it's about how does a place work? What does it feel like to work here? What happens when the bosses aren't looking? How do people work together? Do people really collaborate? What are the principles and values that you use to make decisions? Those kind of things. So it's ingrained in everything, but needs to be worked at. It's not something that just happens.
And within that, how would you describe your leadership style? I mean, what type of leader are you, and maybe who has inspired you, to become a successful leader?
What kind of leader am I? I'm somebody who is very results driven, and I suppose over the years I've tried to move away from being very task driven to being more people focused. But at the end of the day, I like to have impact. I like to know what's going on in the business. I like detail. My colleagues will all attest to that. I think there's a real value in that, in understanding what your people are actually doing every day, what your customers are actually saying, and having a really good sense of your operations and your processes and things like that. And so I get a lot of energy out of that, and then problem solving. Kind of dynamic problem solving, I suppose, is kind of where I've got, that's what I've called it anyway, so, which is really,
Sounds impressive.
It does, it sounds good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind of underpinning everything with a really deep knowledge of what's going on, but then trying to extract yourself a little bit out of it so that you're giving people space, and you're not in the detail all the time, right? Because I think that can be quite suffocating for people reporting into you. but knowing enough to ask the right questions and then seeing where you need to go in and do the problem solving. And so it's kind of that kind of, helicopter leadership or helicopter management, I've heard it called before. And I've seen other leaders do that very well, which is, I suppose what I've learned from it is looking to them, I've kind of known that they've known the detail and they can ask me great questions. They're giving me the space and trusting me to kind of get on with it. But if there's clearly something that's not working, they're not afraid to kind of land the helicopter and kind of say, okay, let's problem solve here and let's get in and let's understand what's going on. So that's definitely something that I try to aspire to. I think, Philip Schindler, who's our Chief Business Officer, somebody I really admire, because he still understands the job, right? He still understands the job as the most junior person in the organisation. He can still name check all the tools, but he's managed to kind of move up a few levels and put that in context. Put the work that we're doing in context of what's going on and all in terms of global technology trends and things like that. But we'll still be able to have a conversation with somebody at the most junior level within the organisation and know what they do. And I think that's really inspiring because I think that gives your team a real sense of authenticity and credibility, which I think, again, if you think about graduates coming in now, I mean, that's what they want. They want to know that you know what you're talking about and that you have a real sense of what they're doing, because that gives them the purpose, right, that they look for.
And also, you hear the kind of common view is that people will have maybe 20 different careers in their lives, kids coming out of college now. So how do you talked about an agile workforce, how do you create agility and flexibility and resilience within that? Because I assume that, everybody in the world wants to work for Google, and some people will get in, but not everyone will make it right the way through. So how do you develop people, to become resilient and agile?
Yeah, it's probably about 90% of our time as a leadership team is spent on people, and it's an ongoing conversation. I think I think about talent at every level within the organisation, and we have an ongoing conversation about that talent and how it's kind of how we assess it, how we give feedback, how we stretch people. And so there's a few nice concepts that we've adopted over the years, like when we're looking at our leadership team, if we're looking at kind of like the leadership team -1 or the leadership team -2, is to really take time, actually bake it into your business rhythms, actually to take time and actually review everybody, not from the point of view of what they're achieving now, but from the point of view of what could they achieve in a few years' time. So there's this kind of, what is their current performance, but then what's their future potential? And it's an aligned conversation, but it's a different conversation, because you can have somebody, where you think they can have huge potential, but you need to really discuss as a leadership team about how you're going to get them there. So it has to be an ongoing conversation where you routinely and with great discipline go through your leadership team. Think about different styles, introverts versus extroverts, talent that shouts, talent that whispers. Sometimes there's great talent in your organisation, but they just don't speak up or they don't put their hand up. And so really kind of having that discipline about thinking about everybody's potential, not just what they're currently doing in their role, but where do we see them. And then making sure that we triangulate that, right, that we get a good few views around the table of their style or their impact. Again, because people can have biases, or organisations can have biases for a certain style. But if you want to make sure you have diverse styles across your leadership team, really triangulating that and getting as much input into that conversation as possible. And then thinking about the stretch, right, and making that a very intentional step. So what would stretch this person? What would be a good thing to get them involved with, or who could mentor them or partner up with them on a project? And one of our favourite things to do is to kind of take somebody who we think has the potential to grow and partner them with a senior leader on
it's
a
like
specific,
a mentor.
but on a specific business project, and with the very intentional view of stretching them, and saying that to them, that this is a stretch for you. And then I think the last thing is you've got to give people feedback, right? I mean, you've got to give people the feedback about how they're showing up, where we see them currently doing really well, talk about their strengths. I think Strengths Finder is a great way of doing that. Talk about their superpower, talk about what we think they do brilliantly, But to stretch you, here's what we need to see from you, and I think that how people react to feedback is one of the ways that I assess talent.
And the snowflake generation, as it's called, people say that they don't want to hear any bad news, and that you got to couch everything in a positive framework. Do you find it's different? Managing people from different generations is very different.
I think you need to be very aware of people's level of self-esteem, because I think we're all seeing increasing levels of anxiety in the workforce, right? And whether that's mental health or what we see. I know there are various studies out there that say that more and more people are more stressed at work, and I think when I think about again more the newer waves of employees coming in, they definitely are hungry for feedback, but you need to think about the ways that you deliver that feedback. And I suppose something that we've discovered is feedback on top of low self-esteem can lead to people spiraling, right? It's not a very positive experience. And so to be able to give really good constructive feedback, and you have to give feedback for people to grow, it's just it's a non-negotiable, but really thinking first about what's this person's underlying self-esteem, what's their sense of self, and I think you need to build that up first, and then be able to go into the more constructive types of criticism. I think what our team look for is, they do look for a lot of feedback, they look for a lot of in-the-moment feedback. And so it's not kind of, I'm sitting in my office and you come in and I tell you what I think you need to be doing. It's, you're out with me in the pitch with the customer, you see exactly what I'm doing, and then you're able to give me real, authentic, credible feedback on what I'm actually doing, not some template where we're filling it out and you don't really, you haven't really assessed me properly. So I think, they do look for really high quality feedback, which I think is really good, right?
Yeah. So if you look at Google, and by any metric that you could imagine, it's been an incredible success. I mean, you really made it when you've got a verb, when you become a verb. But what has Google maybe not done as well as you would like, and think that maybe it needs to do better in the future? Are there any areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to continue to have the ongoing conversation about privacy, right? I think that's a huge question for the whole technology sector, and continue to have a strategy of just enough data to offer the service, but not any more than that, right? But I think that's a constant moving target, and so I think we need to be show that what we're doing, be transparent about what we're doing, show that we're responsible in that area, but continue to listen, continue to work with partners, and continue to see how consumers are feeling about that over the years, and adapt to that. And look, I think also, like any growing company, we need to expand in a way here. For example, even if you think about our footprint here in Dublin, that means the local communities can also benefit, right? And if we look at Dublin, Dublin's a relatively small city compared to some other cities we're based in, and Google has a very big footprint in it. I wouldn't want, the impact of Google to be, Google's here and employs loads of people and has loads of offices, but the local community don't really feel the benefit of it. And so that's certainly something that I've tried to put front and centre in the past 3 years, is to really make sure that, we're sharing that benefit, sharing that value of Google being based here, and that's, certainly behind the work we're doing with Bernardo's in terms of our online safety program and the Google Impact Challenge last year.
Tell us about the Impact Challenge, because that's something that's very close to your heart.
Yeah, it's a really great program, and we launched it in Dublin last year to coincide with Google Ireland's 15th birthday, and it's the first time that it's been done in a city outside the United States, which we were very proud of. It's part of our marketing teams and our Google.org, which is our philanthropic arm. It's part of the way that they engage with local communities. And really the idea is that, one of the best ways that we can give back is support ideas that are out there in non-for-profit and the social enterprise sector. It's not always about Google having all the ideas, right? We know we have the moonshots and the big bets and all of that, but actually when it comes to local communities or what cities need, it's often the non-for-profits or social entrepreneurs in the cities themselves that know what needs to be done. And so it's an impact challenge, it's an idea where you put a call out for ideas and you bring them in, you assess them with a great diverse panel of judges here for Dublin. And like a Lust for Life, Dublin Right Crisis Centre, some of the winners, and we really asked them for ideas about how they could improve life and society in Dublin, and we got a whole range of ideas across so many different sectors. So it's really a way of kind of giving back, supporting kind of social entrepreneurs and non-for-profits in the locality, and doing it in a way where Google plays the role that it should, right? Sometimes Google just should be the facilitator, and I think that's a very important part of how we think about our .org philanthropic efforts.
Very good. And one final question, because I know other people will want to ask some questions. If you were advising a young Fionnuala Meehan now who's leaving Trinity this year in European studies, and she wanted to develop a career in business, what are the nuggets of advice you would give to someone like that?
Yes, what would I say? Oh my goodness. I feel like I just graduated a few years ago, so it's been a roller coaster. But I suppose I would say speak up more. Yeah, I definitely think that I think you have to speak up to and lean into opportunities and say yes to things that maybe you don't think you're good at, or it might scare you a little bit. But I do believe in serendipity and opportunities coming your way, but you need to open yourself up to those, and you need to put yourself in a situation where people are going to offer things to you, and to do that, I think you need to speak up and find your voice. Find your voice sooner is probably what I would have said to myself.
Right. Listen, Fionnuala, it's been fascinating listening to you. Thanks a million for coming along today, and we really appreciate it. Martin.
Okay, we might have about 15 minutes maybe or so for questions if we've some nice gentle questions. We've got roving mics. Aileen, there's a gentleman here, if you don't mind. Yeah.
Thank you. That's fascinating. Thank you very much. David Duffy, Governance Company. You'll probably guess what's coming next. What do you think the big kind of the FANGs need to do to improve the general perception of their governance to the markets, to their staff, to the community? One sees, adverse comments sometimes on, voter rights being with the select few, typically the founders, but we need the founders, of course, and we need to be motivated. So, where do you think the government's focus should be in the next 5 or 10 years at board level for these organisations?
Well, I think at a very broad level, I think there's definitely going to be more regulation, and so I think in terms of governance, how companies are organising around that to meet that regulation in a positive and constructive way. And I think if you hear anybody, particularly anybody in Google, whether it's Kent Walker who was over here talking about government status summit, whether it's Sundar, that whilst they don't want to see regulations for regulation's sake, these are large sectors, large platforms, and there is a need to regulate in a constructive way. And I would, so I would think that that's definitely a focus for governance in terms of how is that being mirrored in structures that are put in place to meet new regulatory guidelines, in terms of right through the operations and how decisions are made. And I think it does go back to how you're running your operations and how you're making decisions and how you're dealing with people's data, all of that sort of thing. And that's taken extremely seriously at all levels. For example, privacy is taken extremely seriously at all levels within the organisation, and indeed there are different ways that we've organised around that. over the past few years. I think that's probably an example of that.
Okay, we've a question here with Kings. Thanks. Okay. Where would you like?
Hi, thank you very much.
Hi.
Seamus Flynn, as country manager, how do you measure and track success?
Well, we track how we're perceived, you know, at a general level, how Google is perceived as a technology company, from the point of view of users of, you know, of our services. That's something that's very important to us, against a number of different things that we would expect in terms of, you know, trust and things like that. I think also, you know, for me personally, that the site is continuing to grow in the right way, that we're continuing to get the right types of investment in terms of Google's overall growth, and that our footprint is continuing to be material and is expanding in the right way. You know, so Dublin isn't the right place to set up every team that Google is building, but you know, we definitely want to be in the mix for the right types of teams. And so getting that right level of growth and that right diversity across what we're doing and making sure that it's substantial, it's material, and from the point of view of Google Incorporated, right, is something that I would think about. And then I think, you know, ensuring that we're working positively with our community, whether that's our business community, whether that's our local community, is a very important thing. And that's not something that's a number, but you can be sure that our local community tell us when they're not happy with us. And so that can be, that's just an ongoing job. But I don't think we can be as present as we are with as big a footprint as we have, without spending a lot of time thinking about how our near neighbours are experiencing us. So that's not a number, but it's definitely, excuse me, something that we pay a lot of attention to. I think also, you know, just looking at our workforce and looking at employee engagement, looking at not only the diversity of the workforce, but, you know, how we are making sure our managers are as inclusive as possible, and we want to be the standout site for that. So we're a relatively junior site as well if you look at our site versus other sites. And so it's really important for us that things like people management, people leadership is front and centre. And you know, the extent to which our people leaders are trained and are skilled when it comes to diversity and inclusion is something that we track very closely.
We've got somebody has a microphone. Thank you. Just been here for a while.
Thanks for the Kingsley Aikens from the Network Institute. You mentioned at the beginning sustainability, and you know, the Business Council in the US recently came out with that statement that the role of a company is not just to service its shareholders, but also to be aware of its stakeholders. And there have millions of young people around the world marching over the last few weeks. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that dynamic. How does Google respond to it, and where do you see that dynamic going? And what should companies do to respond to that dynamic in the next 5 to 10 years?
I mean, I think there is, you know, there's definitely something in terms of kind of that grassroots feeling about it, and I think there's that kind of grassroots nature is actually a very important point of Google's culture. I think if you look at kind of the way Google has grown over the years, it's still a relatively flat organisation, and it's still an organisation where anybody in the company can ask the CEO any question every Thursday, right, and we'll get an answer, right. So the grassroots opinion is very important, and it does influence how leaders think. And I think over time, you know, the fact that, you know, that leaders get more questions around this and what are our responsibilities in this area. I mean, my boss was over just a few weeks ago, and one of our town halls, which tends to be typically kind of business-focused town halls, she got a question on sustainability. And it was, well, what are we doing about it? And not only what are we doing about it, but because we work with small businesses, how are we helping small businesses who don't have the resources that Google has, you know, be more sustainable businesses? Which was a fascinating question, right, from somebody who's probably only a few weeks in the company, right? So I think it's about kind of capturing some of that grassroots and some of the energy that's coming from, you know, the graduates. They're just coming out and they're coming in, and you know, they have, you know, certainly in our company, they have an ability to influence leaders in terms of how much responsibility we take on in that area. And I think the second thing then is just thinking about the scale at which we operate, the larger companies, the scale at which we operate. You know, a small decision from those companies can have a big difference in terms of how energy is used or data centres. And I mean, already we do a ton of work with our data centres to make sure that they're running with as much renewable energy as possible. As I said, we've been carbon neutral since 2007. So I think at that kind of planning infrastructure level, then I think all companies need to be looking at this and making whatever decisions they can to I think just to show the way.
Okay, I think we've Pat Castle here, please.
Morning, Phil, Pat Castle, ex-entry. I'm interested in, you probably hire the best people, but do you think that the education system that we have delivers the kinds of skills that are preparing the graduates and kids that are leaving that education system for work, and for the kinds of flexibility that they're going to need over the course of a lifetime?
Yeah, I mean, I think our education system stacks up quite well. I mean, if obviously we see graduates from all across Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and Irish graduates stack up well. I think they do have, what stands out is their ability to collaborate and to work with others and to kind of absorb other styles and things like that. Having said that, I mean, I think we all want more critical thinking, and we all want more of a STEM focus across our education system. And that's not just because we want more engineers and more female engineers. We definitely want more engineers and female engineers, but it's because every sector is going to have every sector is going to have some sort of technology at its core when we think about 10, 20, 30 years time. And so we don't want, we certainly don't want we don't want people not being able to take advantage of that because they don't have some of those basic skills. And so a lot of what we've done is try to work with government on things like having computer science on the junior cert curriculum, work on that curriculum and see how we can bake that in, and how we can bake that in as early as we possibly can. So we definitely would like to see more students studying STEM subjects. We would like to see more female students opting into that and not opting out, which is what we see at the moment. And in addition to that, to your point, not just the technology part of it, but the problem-solving, critical thinking part of it, because I think that brings the agility. And so, we want to make sure then as well that we have teachers who can teach that, right? So that's been a large focus of a lot of the STEM outreach, the kind of courses we have. We have off-the-shelf computer science courses that any teacher can follow online and use. But in addition to those kind of global programs that we've rolled out in Ireland, we're also doing a lot of work on the junior cert curriculum, working with industry just to make sure that we can see the best possible curriculum going at the junior and ultimately the elite cert level as well.
Hello, Fionnuala. I'm from Singapore. I'm a great admirer of Google's, and I find the mission of organising the world's information and making it universally accessible and useful is inspirational. Just wondering, in relation to the tremendous growth that Google has experienced over the last few years, there are some unintended consequences of that growth, particularly I would feel in relation to the viability of the world's news media at a national level. In Ireland, I know the UK have published a Cairn cost review on this subject, and Australia have looked at the issue as well. Because having strong local and national indigenous media is really important. I know it's not your responsibility to make them viable, but there is an unintended consequence of your growth that it's impacting on their viability. That's a worry for the world, I think, in the future in terms of having that strong indigenous voice. I'm just wondering, does that trouble you?
Well, I could absolutely agree, and I think Google would agree that we do need those voices, and we do need that diversity, and we do need journalism to be healthy. And that's why we have the News Initiative, which is about how we can partner with news organisations, journalists, publishers, to support them, to make sure that we're also making sure that they have the skills and capabilities they need to, you know, to be successful in, you know, a world that's increasingly about, you know, online dissemination of all of that. So, you know, we see ourselves as a platform. We've done I think a lot of work over the course of the past few years to think about news as a specific topic. And I've made some changes to search and indeed to YouTube to make sure that we're thinking about credible sources and things like that. But I think more broadly, the News Initiative Outreach aims at doing exactly that, which is, you know, recognising and acknowledging that there's huge value to that continuing vibrancy of the journalism sector, and to think about, well, again, what can we do as an enabler, and how can we make sure that journalism, you know, and journalists can understand, you know, some of the research they can do online and how they can be successful online and just in the whole digital space. So yeah, and it is, you know, again, it's a moving target because things can change. I think with social media and news is being disseminated, it's changing all the time. But it's definitely something that's thought, you know, discussed in a very thoughtful way, and you know, and how we can across all of the platforms that we have, you know, make sure that we're being responsible.
Thanks very much. I've been in a distribution business, looking at expanding international. Amazon has an interesting feature with the search and buy link, but we don't trust them because they take our data and compete with us. What kind of products, may I ask, is Google working on so that we have an alternative platform that we can have that feature?
Sorry, I missed what business you were in?
The feature of where you search, but then you go directly to the buy.
Oh, sure.
Because, you know, with Google, we search our customer search, but then they have to come off to make it the acquisition, whereas Amazon offers the facility, you know, you go and you search it and you just hit the buy button.
Yeah.
But they're a direct competitor.
Sure.
So this is a problem for us, and we're looking for an alternative.
It's always good to have many alternatives out there. I mean, look, I think search is search still works pretty well. And I think you're going to see search develop over the years, you know, over the next few years. I mean, I think our shopping product will be the obvious one, and I mean, that's, you know, that's where we have merchants able to kind of directly upload, you know, their feed of products, you know, and the ads show up against other search ads. I mean, that really is the key product we have for the retail sector. And that is aimed at being accessible for small and medium merchants to be able to, you know, set up their SKUs and get them up there and appear in a more kind of, you know, buying ready way versus the other search results. So they would still be the two products that we would be talking to small businesses about in terms of finding customers and acquiring customers, retaining customers.
Can you go further, I guess, is my question.
Well, I think, you know, what we do, I think we need to think about, you know, where we add most value along that journey, along that customer journey. And I think with something like a Market Finder or Grow My Store, these are free online tools where we help businesses, for example, with Market Finder, find new markets abroad, right? So that's taking all of the information that we have in terms of keyword searches and everything we know about what it takes to export to another country. And any company can go in and look at, you know, who is searching for their product in wherever, right? And that's launched in Ireland. It's actually launched in America, China, and then Ireland. So Market Finder is a free online tool. Grow My Store, I think, is another example of that, which is really looking at how we can help retailers understand the whole customer journey, and, you know, what things they need to be thinking about in terms of a retailer to convert better at the end of the day. And so I think where we can play, you know, where we can add most value, and again, I think it's important to think about, you know, where Google can add most value, right? Because I still think we need a lot of alternatives out there in the market, and we need that vibrancy to be there. But where I think we can add most value is where, with example, with Market Finder, where with all of the data that we have at an aggregate level and with machine learning, small businesses can access that. So they don't have to build that and research that themselves. Small businesses can access that free of charge, right? And I think that's probably where we can add most value.
Thank you.
Okay, we've a question here, Kira.
Ciara Farrell from Trinity College. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the professional development that you nurture within Google.
Leadership development?
In general,
Yeah.
I suppose professional development for the type of skills, the agility, the resilience that you were talking about.
Yeah. I mean, we have a pretty extensive curriculum. I think our curriculum is kind of split between, you know, our hard skills in terms of the skills needed to do the job, plus softer skills in terms of influencing, communication, respectful leadership, inclusive leadership. So we look at kind of what people do and then how people do it. So what are the hard skills? You need to be a great salesperson, what are the soft skills, but then also how are you showing up as a leader? How are you being inclusive? How are you collaborating? How are you prioritizing delivering results? All of those good things. I think that as well, a huge focus we've had over the past few years is, you know, not just in training but in coaching, because I think that provides a huge additional layer of development for every level within the organisation, because we know that, you know, training can only go so far, and then really you need to be out there observing what people are actually doing, and nurturing them in a way that kind of helps them to find their own answers, because mostly they know it, but you know, that requires a pivot in an organisation. It's not something that you can just drop in. You know, you can't just make a management team a team that is also a team of coaches overnight. And I think that's really important because of this agility point, is that, you know, everything is changing, dynamics are changing, customers are asking for different things. You know, the environment within which we're working is changing all the time. So your training can't possibly keep up with that. And so I think you need to be out role modeling for your team, understanding what your team are doing, observing the individuals on your team, whether that's an entry-level salesperson, whether that's a senior leader, and giving that constructive feedback and having that kind of ongoing conversation. So that's a huge part of our personal development, because I think, you know, people get a lot from that. They get that in-the-moment feedback, which really, you know, what's the point in saving all of that feedback for an annual appraisal, you know? I think, you know, there's huge power in developing a contract with the person where, like, I'm going to get you to where you need to be in terms of personal development, and here's how we're going to do it. And actually creating that construct for that ongoing feedback is really important.
Afternoon, it was fascinating to listen to you this morning. I have a question around what is your view on the key skills for the next decade in the era of AI and automation?
EQ. I mean, I think there's a lot about problem solving and critical thinking. I mean, I think that they're really important. But you know, what can machine learning and AI not do? It's the EQ, right? It's that bit about you know, what are you bringing into a room? What kind of, you know, they have the saying, the leader brings the weather with them, right? Are you bringing stress into a room? Are you bringing positivity into a room? How are you reading the room? How are you reading others? How are you collaborating with others? I mean, EQ goes so far, even in terms of like sales. You know, I mean, you can have all the algorithms you want. We have all of them, right? You still have to make a connection with the person in the meeting or at the other end of the phone, understand their business. And a huge amount of that is EQ. And when we're dealing with our graduates coming in, and of course they have to understand the technical aspects of the ads product, and they have to understand how machine learning powers our automation and all of that sort of stuff. But if that's all they go in with, they're not going to make the sale. You know, they have to connect with that CEO or with that CMO, understand their business objectives, understand their consumers, and a huge amount of that is EQ. And so I think that is going to be the bit that is left, and that's where we all need to think about where we can, where we're adding value. So I think that's just, you know, and within that, I mean, you can break that down in terms of the various aspects of it. But, you know, for me, it would be that emotional intelligence.
I'd like to finish now by thanking Fionnuala so much for giving so generously of your time. I've really enjoyed the discussion.